There wasn't a Facebook reel of some guy, roping a yearling out there. There wasn't any internet, or there weren't any websites that explained anything. People's connection to that culture was Western Horseman. And I think that's what's neat about this industry is, people, they learn to be an entrepreneur. You kind of have to learn to be more of an entrepreneur because it's just you. There's not a guaranteed paycheck. Even if you're working for a ranch, you can't think, okay, the goal is not for me to reach another comfort zone. My goal is to grow and to find my calling and progress and make myself a better person.
Welcome back to the Wealthy Cowboy Show. Today we've got a guy that you've heard from before. He's been on our special episode we did at the WRCA finals, Ross Hecox, and got to hear a little bit about his story and his background there. But today we're going to take a little deeper dive. Ross, thanks for coming on this morning.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's take a deeper dive into your background, kind of tell us how you grew up. I know it's a little bit different. I think it's cool how you built I talked about it in that show, but like how you built a business parallel to the Western industry that you're like super involved and super passionate about it, but you're not like directly in it every day, but you're right there and you get to tell the stories of a lot of the big guys and stuff like that. So, just start wherever you want to start in your background.
Well, I've been in equine journalism or covering ranches as a writer and photographer for probably 28 years now. And my background wasn't ranching. I was raised on kind of a horse farm. My dad was a hobby breeder. He loved raising horses, and I can get deeper in that if you want me to. But I mean, just kind of more of a summary. I've been myself since college. I've been following this industry for 28 years, and as a writer and a photographer. And here in the past 3 or 4 years, I've been doing this podcast, the Cowboy Life. And man, it's just something I've always been passionate about. Even when I was real little, I was very interested in cowboy stuff. And my dad had horses, but we didn't really have like trained geldings. He had all these brood mares.
You probably grew up too, like in the era was like when cowboy was cool. Were you kind of in that era too? Like, I'm trying to think when you were growing up, like were all the Westerns still on mainstream TV and all that stuff?
Oh, we watched John Wayne movies and Jimmy Stewart movies all the time. And we played cowboys and Indians as little kids, and
Lonesome Dove probably came on TV. What? I mean, I guess you were a little bit older then.
Yeah, I was a teenager, I think, when that came out.
Yeah.
Oh, that was big. Yeah, it was big. So yeah, we were wrapped up in it.
Yeah, I mean there was a gap there. It seems like that you hear about, like it was cool for everybody, mainstream, everything. Like cowboy was cool back then to a certain point. I don't know if it was like 2000, like Y2K and stuff or what, and then it was like not cool, and it, people, the activists and stuff got a hold of it, and it seems like, and it just wasn't a cool mainstream thing. It seems to me like, of course I was younger coming up then, so I wasn't thinking about it as much, but looking back, I kind of think that. And then now it's come back again since COVID. I think like COVID brought a lot of people back to thinking about the country and where your food comes from, and then also Yellowstone and stuff like that. Real quick, if you're a listener of this show and you're serious about leveling up your income, your mindset, and your life in 2026, you need to join the Wealthy Cowboy VIP community. It's where the real action happens. You'll get exclusive discounts from our sponsors, VIP merch deals, early access to episodes, private Q&As, and I even pull questions from the group to ask our guests on the show. It's a crew of driven Western people pushing each other to grow. The link is in the description. Go join now and see what's happening inside.
Going further back, talking about when it was cool, obviously during the 50s, all the kids were growing up wanting to be cowboys. They were watching Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers and all that stuff. And then that kind of started to change a little bit. But still, throughout the 60s and 70s, big movies, major movie stars were doing Westerns. And then I even remember, well, I don't remember it's particularly, but like in 1980 or 1979, that Urban Cowboy movie came out, and it got really big as far as the popular culture being very interested in cowboys, and that carried on throughout the 80s. But then, things started to change sometime in the 80s or 90s or whatever, and it's kind of gotten a resurgence here in the last 10, 15 years, I think. And but regardless, whether it was a popular thing or not, that's always what my interest has been in. I remember wearing boots to school every day, and all the other kids were in tennis shoes and stuff, and me and my brother were like, we're wearing boots because dadgummit, that's how we were,
Yeah.
And so that it was just always been a passion, and I didn't think that I'd be able to get into it as quickly as I did. My dad was Air Force, and but he was passionate about horses. My mom was raised around horses. Her dad was just loved the rodeo scene, and they did the posse rides, and they went on long trail rides. They raised goats, and they moved goats with their horses and so forth. So that's her background. And I think my dad was one of the big attractions my dad had to my mom was the fact that she had that horse, because he was ate up with horses, even though he had no background, no interest in, or not no background and no exposure to it at all. And they got married, and he got into it. And I think he was wilder about it than she was at the end. But still, he was mostly just breeding mares and trying to raise all around horses. And I can tell you how many times I got on some spoiled mare and try to get something done. And there was one mare he had in particular that he had sent her out and got her trained, but she was a rotten mare and would pretend like she was getting spooked at something so that she could have an excuse to bolt hard left. And I'm just this, 10-year-old kid trying to get along. And I don't know if you remember what the saddles were back then, or at least the saddles my dad had. The stirrups were like as stiff as boards, and the saddle seat was as slick as can be. And I was sitting there, and I can't tell you how many times I slipped off that mare, and she'd run back to the barn, and I'd walk back to the barn. But that didn't deter me, even though we had horses that weren't great to ride. I'd ride a little bit. When I went to college, I took English was my major, journalism was my minor, and then just about every other class that I took as an elective was equine science, and one of them was colt starting.
What made you want to major in high school and stuff? Did you like writing
Yeah. I remember trying to start a book when I was like 13 or 14, so I knew I wanted to be a writer. And going to college, I wasn't exactly sure what kind of writing I was going to do, if it would be journalism or writing books or whatever. I just knew that's the direction I'm going to head. And I picked English major because it was a lot more versatile. It gave me a lot of opportunities to, learn a lot of different things. And if I needed to drill down on one major later on, I could. But I took a lot of creative writing. I did a lot of short story writing in college. And read a lot of literature, both British literature and English literature, and I ate it up. I love that stuff, and so that was always a big part of my interest too. Was writing. Photography was as well, but I didn't really get any formal training in photography till after college. And but yeah, like I said, the fascination with horses was still there, and I had an advisor. Really, actually, he was a professor there at A&M named Doug Householder, and he was also an extension agent, a Texas extension agent, and he was a major person who really encouraged me. I met him because I was taking a class in magazine journalism, and one of our projects was to write a major feature article, and there was this organization just starting up called the Stock Horse of Texas that they put on a clinic down there. And he was had organized it. So I got to know him and wrote this, did this little article about the association. And then I got to know him, and then he ended up having me do some work for him and promoting that new organization. The Stock Horse of Texas is still going to this day. But I was also at the time writing for the school paper covering sports. And I thought, based on how my career should go, that I needed to get into maybe newspaper writing first and maybe work my way into, some equine journalism if I could. And by then I knew I liked, journalism and equine journalism. He encouraged me. He says, if you want to write for a horse magazine, Ross, you should just go for it. And he said, I'll put in a recommendation for you. So I put in applications to Quarter Horse Journal, Paint Horse Journal, Horse and Rider, Western Horseman, all these different magazines. And I think just by the grace of God, there was an opening at Paint Horse Journal, and I got a job with them right out of college. And it was a great opportunity for me because I learned about a higher level of writing. I had a copy editor named Dan Streeter that was very strict and great for improving me as a writer. The editor was a great photographer. Daryl Dodds taught me everything I needed to know about photography. And then there was a very good art department there that helped with, just creating a story in magazine journalism. This is 1997 was there's an art to it all, and I loved every bit of it. But then on top of that, I was writing about horses for the first time.
What did that look like as your job? Did they like have these? Did they just assign you events or stories to cover, and you go do that, or is it on you to go just be out in the world and be like, this may be a good story, or this, or how did that work?
I think. Daryl Dodds was great at knowing how to tap into your passion. And so there were assignments, of course, especially in the beginning. But, there was always a very big push to come up with story ideas. And I remember him telling me, we're going to have meetings, and I want you to propose, several story ideas every time. And that's just a matter. And when you're brand new to the business, it's kind of a little bit intimidating trying to find stories when you don't know anybody, you don't know the business that well. But so they helped us along. But yeah, you'd pitch stories, and there'd be a good discussion about, well, okay, I like this idea, Ross, but maybe we need to, take this angle, or maybe you should include this type of source or whatever. But it was a big learning curve for me, and not just about magazine journalism at that point. I'm a 23-year-old kid at the time, but also learning the horse business too. And I'd been around it, but I didn't know the horse show business that well. I didn't know paint horses that well. I didn't know bloodlines. And I remember spending hours and hours just looking through the database, learning about pedigrees and everything like that back then. And but it was really good for me. It was a great group of people that really supported me and helped me out. And they helped me find success. Yeah.
And where'd you go from there?
From there, I went to Cut and Horse Chatter. And National Cut and Horse Association, their magazine is the Cut and Horse Chatter, which I always thought was kind of funny, kind of a podunk sound, but
yeah.
But no, that was a good opportunity for me too, and that's probably where I really started making some connections that I still have to this day, and probably got a little bit. So even though I did Paint Horse Journal, so many of the stories were about training articles or about certain breeders or owners that had had some success in the business. There were a few opportunities, though, where I could write about ranchers, and there weren't a whole lot of ranchers that were deep in the paint horse business. As we can imagine, so many traditional ranchers, they're quarter horse people. But I still remember telling a few stories about about some ranchers, and that's what I love the most. And when I got with the Cut and Horse Association, I got even closer to that ranching industry, because there's a lot more connections there. And so I ate that up, and I was there for a couple of years. And then from there, I went to Performance Horse Magazine and focused on cow horses, cutting horses, and reining horses, and loved that. And I was there for a couple of years. And then I went to Western Horseman. I started working for them in 2006.
So I guess in like the paint horse deal, you're covering a whole different thing than you were going to the cutting horse, and then you get strictly to the performance horses. Those all kind of blend. And then as you come back around to Western Horseman, were you riding and covering mainly rancher type stuff then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was. I think Western Horseman it's not only ranching, it's horsemanship. There is some performance horse stuff there. There's some rodeo in there. It is a good mix, but I think if I I think that magazine really allowed me to just dig way deep into the ranching culture, even more so. And tell
was that
story.
like the top of? Was that like the top thing back then, like Western Horseman?
Oh
like,
yeah,
yeah. I'm just even now, even as like magazines aren't as big. I mean, they've still got to be one of the biggest ones, I would think, in our industry.
DX Trailer Sales is based out of Lubbock, Texas, and it's definitely not just a trailer dealership. If you are involved in the Western way of life, and if you're listening to this show, you probably are, they have something you need. From trailers for a day working cowboy to a full-time cattle hauler to hay trailers for a farmer or rancher to arena drags, rope and chutes, and feeders for the rodeo cowboy or cowgirl. They also deal in every kind of hay any of your animals could ever need. Literally anything you need for farming, ranching, or rodeoing, they have something for you. And it's gonna be at a super affordable price. Besides all that, everyone you deal with there is super friendly and helpful. We just got new custom flatbeds built for our pickups, and I also got probably the coolest trailer you've ever seen built. And you can stay tuned for a video we're gonna do, and it's gonna show all of that and some more of their products also. So check out DX Trailer Sales on Facebook or dxtrailers.com.
Yeah, they're the leading horse magazine, and they have been for the longest time. I think when I started with Western Horseman, a big rival, if you will, or a competitor to Western Horseman was Horse and Rider. They were doing a really good job. Their readership was close to Western Horseman's. Their circulation was about 160,000. When I joined Western Horseman, that was about 185 or 190,000, something like that. Maybe it might have been 200,000. And that time period, 2006, when I started with them, was really probably the pinnacle of magazine publishing as far as the number of magazines that were out there, the revenue streams that came in for that, the amount of readers that were out there. Newsstands were everywhere. It was a different day and age. It's changed quite a bit here in the last 20 years. But
I remember my dad was a subscriber to Western Horseman, and he still is a big magazine person. But we had he wouldn't throw them away. We had a whole like trunk type box thing that was just stacked full of Western Horsemans for, I don't know how old they went. And I'm not sure why he was keeping them. It's not like we ever pulled them out and referenced them or anything. And then I remember it was like it's still kind of a joke in the family of, I don't know what happened, but he was mad at my mom because he said he stopped getting it, and he was like, "You threw away my subscription deal" or something like that. And it did get mailed in. But I remember going to, and then there was a point where he wasn't a subscriber, but we would go to HEB, and you'd go to that magazine stand deal over there and get Western Horseman and American Cowboy and some Cowboys and Indians and whatever else you're gonna get. They don't even have that in HEB anymore. Right. Or the R1.
It's happened so quickly, and I think it's really important to, or it's worthwhile to think about and review what it was like if you go back to the 1990s, 1980s, 70s, all prior to the internet, if you will. People knew nothing about ranching and horses unless they were reading a book or reading a magazine, maybe watching a movie. That was their connection. There wasn't a Facebook reel of some guy, roping a yearling out there. There wasn't any internet, or there weren't any websites that explained anything. People's connection to that culture was Western Horseman. I remember years ago, I was talking to someone about how they had cowboy teepees, and I was just now getting into it. I was wanting to buy one. I said, well, how'd you find out? I mean, I'd never seen a cowboy teepee at Walmart, obviously, or even Tractor Supply or any of those stores. And I was like, where did you get a cowboy teepee? They said, well, there's an ad for it in Western Horseman. And that right there is a good example of the power of that magazine. And when I started working for Western Horseman, there were so many craftsmen that they owed a lot of their success to having had been a story written about them in Western Horseman. I did a story on a hat maker, or I guess I did the photos, and someone else wrote the story. But he was down in Big Bend, Texas, and Jim Spradley, And he told me after we did the story, but hadn't quite come out yet. I was just talking to him. He said a friend of his called up that was, I think he was a bit maker or something. He says, "Get ready, Jim. Get ready, because once that story hits the magazine, you're going to be flooded with orders." And that I've heard that story over and over again. And that's what the power of Western Horseman was, for two reasons. That's the people, the kind of regard people held for Western Horseman. But then also there just wasn't that many other outlets, media outlets. There weren't podcasts. I started working in the magazine business during the heyday, I think, of magazines. It was 1997 when I started. And, the Paint Horse Journal issues would regularly be 250, 300 pages. Our Stallion issue would be 500 to 600 pages long. Quarter Horse Journal was doing the same thing, and it was just loaded thick of stallion advertisements, and then other advertisements as well. And at the same time, Western Horseman, I wasn't there yet, but they were putting out 200, 250 page issues. And of course, their advertisers were more commercial advertisers than stallion owners. And there was a lot of good revenue going on back then. And I got in on it just at the right time. And now here in the last 20 years, I've watched it just really dwindle down quite a bit.
Yeah. Kind of on the business side of your career, was there ever to become a freelance writer? Was there ever that in your thought deal, or were you always just like looking for that salary position at one magazine or another? Or were you ever like, I can go out on my own and make a living doing this?
Yeah. In the back of my mind, I always thought, not even in the back of my mind, but I always thought, yeah, one of these days I'd like to just break away and freelance. But from a financial standpoint, that's a big leap. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty with that. And it helps to have contacts built up and a lot of connections with other editors. And I probably hadn't had that built up early on in my career, obviously. So
that's something somebody does like later on, I guess. Or was there anybody doing that you knew of back then?
Yeah, we had some folks that worked for Western Horseman, and they got to the point where they were ready to move on and do some freelancing. But it really helps when you have a spouse or another source of income that helps support that, because it's not even back in 2010 or 2015 or whatever. I know we had freelancers that worked for the magazine that would do some stories, but they were always, hustling, And I don't know that they were driving brand new fancy pickup trucks or anything, doing that kind of living. But still, even though that was a reality, I wanted to freelance at one point, but at the time, until 2022, I was the editor-in-chief of Western Horseman. There was a lot of benefits to that. It sure is nice when you got that regular paycheck, and then you've got your travels paid for, your expenses are covered, your meals, hotels, all that stuff it's really nice to have that. And it's not easy to go out on your own, after that.
So when did you start? When did like the idea and concept and stuff of Cowboy Life come about?
That was in 2022. I had done some work with Too Tall Essick, who's my producer, and he is married to Cam Essick. And Cam Essick, she is a great stallion promoter, and that's kind of her business is promoting leading cutting horse, reining horse sires. And he has been he's got all kinds of things going on. He's got real estate stuff going on. He's got video and audio, and he had already put together a pretty good podcast with Andrea Fapani, the top reining horse trainer. And they called it, what did they call that thing? I should know.
Wasn't it just like Ride with Andrea, or I can't remember. I've seen it. I don't think I've ever listened to it, but I've seen it.
Too Tall's going to strangle me for not on this. But yeah, it's with Andrea Fapani. And so they had that going. They were pretty good. And I'd done some work with Too Tall on a couple other stories. One was with Nick Dowers and one was with Clayton Edsall. And it was a situation where he did some video, And then I wrote the article and did the photos. And so I got to know him that way. And then after I'd left Western Horseman, he called me up one day, if I remember it correctly. And he said, have you ever thought about just doing a podcast? He says, you know so many people in this industry that and you can interview them and tell their story. And I was like, I'd love to do that. And he said, well, let's maybe try to do that. So I was like, all right, okay. And he sent me some equipment. And I got to thinking about it, and we came up with the title Cowboy Life, and recorded Tom Morehouse for the first time. I think it was in August of 22. And started doing podcasts at that point. And
did you consume podcasts at all, or did you know anything about them before that?
Yeah, I knew about them. I'd listened to some of them, but I wouldn't say I was an avid listener. I liked the concept of it. And there was This American Life, I think, was one podcast I listened to regular, and a couple others. So yeah, I guess the short answer is yes. But yeah, we felt like this was kind of at the time, not brand new or not novel or anything, but we didn't know, at least I wasn't aware of a lot of podcasts that was able to tell the authentic stories of these ranchers and cowboys and just have them tell their life story. And I think my second episode was with Shannon Hall, who's kind of a longtime friend of mine. He's a rancher in southern Oklahoma, and he was a great storyteller. And, we talked to Sean Williams and Terry Forrest, and those were those early ones, Craig Haythorne. And, it took off pretty well. And, well, I should say that at first it didn't take off really well. It was just kind of a slow growth, but it's doing pretty well now.
Were you traveling to all these people, and were you also doing stories on them with the podcasts, or how did that?
It's a mixture, but yeah, early on I decided that most of the people I interviewed, I figured would be more comfortable if I interviewed them at their home, in their barn, in their stall. I'm not their stall, maybe their tack room, and just thought that would be a better situation for them. And it worked well with what I do anyway. When I travel, I need to travel for my job. If you're going to tell a story the right way, you don't want to do it over the phone, especially if you're the photographer. So, yeah, we would. I'd organize trips, and there was times that I would do a story about someone, and then also do a podcast at the same time. But not always. You got to be number one. I think if someone who's a great podcast isn't always necessarily a great story, and vice versa. Sometimes a good story doesn't quite work for a podcast, and there's a lot of various reasons for that. But then also you want to, an editor of a magazine, if they agree for you to write a story for them, you want to be sensitive to what they feel like is important. And if you're doing a podcast with someone, you don't want to go verbatim. The story that you tell in the magazine, I don't feel like you want to go verbatim and tell the same story, through a podcast. Mm-hmm. Different spin, different angle. And I think the timing of it, I don't necessarily talk in detail with these editors about this, but I try to be, have a little bit of, just be smart about how that comes out. I did a story on Don Murphy, in Western Horseman here recently. It was in their October issue. And that was one situation where, I also did a podcast with them and came out actually the same time. That's not always going to happen, but we kind of talked more about his ranching background in the podcast because that fit Cowboy Life better. And then the feature article was more about who he is and what his career is right now, which is a really incredible mentor for cow horse trainers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, that's cool how you've kind of evolved, and how I found it too was, I think the first podcast I was introduced to was Cow Horse Full Contact, because my wife is a great one. Yeah, my wife is in the Rain Cow Horse deal, and we're always traveling in the pickup, and I was actually asleep, and she was driving, and I woke up, and she was playing that. I was like, "What is this deal?" And I've always been fascinated with storytelling ever since I was little, and getting to listen to the old guys, my grandpa, my great uncle, getting to sit around the old men and listen to them tell stories. And that's kind of, that's what it was. Yeah. And telling stories. I was like, this is cool. So I went back, listened to every episode, like binged Cow Horse Full Contact, caught up to it, and I was like, well, need something else now. And I think I just searched like cowboy, and eventually found yours, and I can't remember what, but I was like, these podcasts are awesome. These stories is way better than listening to music. And then I found what really changed my life is I started listening to some business ones that just popped up, and I just happened to was like, oh, it was a good episode, and I kept listening, and then it branched off into more and more and more. But yeah, that's how I found Cowboy Life. Just, and the search deal is, I mean, I think when people search cowboy, yours will pop up, mine will pop up, and you'll have like a little thing to go off of there.
Well, do you remember what's the first episode you listened to of Cowboy Life?
I do not remember. I listened to Don Murphy's the other day. I've listened to I'm trying to think. Some of those original ones. Probably the Morehouse one. Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Maybe Craig Haythorne, maybe Jimbo Humphreys.
Yes.
Or Trip Townsend, maybe.
Yeah. For sure, all those. Yeah. I mean, I've listened to a bunch of them. Actually, the one recently, I've actually listened to it 2 or 3 times because I work with a guy. We use cow dogs, bay dogs, cur dogs, quite a bit down there. Not as much as some people, but a lot of times when I go, we use dogs a lot, and I've got some dogs. And you did the Gray Ranch. Can't remember his name.
Oh, yeah. Kent Ledoux.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so this guy I work with, he's fascinated with it. And so I was like, listen to this. And I think we listened to it twice. We'll get in the pickup on a long drive or something. He's like, put that one on with the cow dogs, and they're crossing the cattle and stuff on the boat and all that stuff. And so we've listened to that one several times. And that's just a memorable one because we've listened to it a couple times, and it's different. Like I don't think I heard that guy anywhere else. And like Tom Morehouse and Boots and some of those other guys have been on other ones.
Sure.
And you've seen their stuff,
right.
But yeah, the ones that nobody's heard of are good ones too.
And to me, that's the coolest thing about Cowboy Life or at least something I've enjoyed is I've had some big name people on, and I've had some people that like Kent. I don't think I'll figure at least nobody knows who Kent is, but sometimes, or a lot of times, those guys that aren't super well known have the best numbers, have the most listeners. In fact, obviously Red Steagall is a bigger name than Don Murphy, and Red Steagall's episode came out and did well recently. Let's see, that was in September. Don Murphy's came out in October, and his podcast has already surpassed Red's as far as listeners go. And Kent Ledoux is another example. He's done really well. And I think just that, you just write a description about alligators and swamps and hurricanes. You're like, we got to listen to this, And so, and that's, to me, that's cool that that tells me that our listeners at least appreciate and recognize authenticity. And they're not, I don't think they're as starstruck maybe as maybe some other listeners might be. I think our listeners they know this business, and they know, or they can detect an authentic story just from a distance. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in this show. Is like, we're like a pretty close, I don't remember what number this will be, but pretty close to 100 episodes.
Yeah.
And every one of those has been, I've had Buster Frierson on twice, but other than that, it's all new people. And there's only so many cowboy influencer type people, that have big social media followings. Like Buster's one of them. He's a real popular episode. But other than that, it's like you said, it's people that nobody heard of. And that's kind of been my strategy too. I mean, to start with was like, I want to get the big names to get eyeballs first. Right. And then now that gave me the leverage, the reputation to go talk to somebody down the road that's getting started, or maybe an older guy that's been doing it for a long time. And every person out there, has a circle of at least a few hundred people,
Yeah.
So every small person's going to bring in their little crowd of 100, 200 people, that they know.
Right.
They're going to tell their friends and family, and they're going to tune in. And then some of them are going to be like, oh, I'm going to go back and listen to these other episodes.
Yeah.
So yeah. And it's cool. And also like I see the thirst for the cowboy rancher story. Anything I do with cattle and horses in the title. I mean, those are my biggest episodes.
Yeah.
If it's more of a mainstream business guy, even though you'll get more knowledge, more tactical knowledge about business from that. People really like the storytelling and really hearing about the cowboy stuff, the rancher stuff, the horse stuff,
Let's be honest, ordering custom merch is way harder than it should be. You get some random sales rep who thinks ag is short for aggressive. They slap your logo on a boxy tee no one wants or the same cap that your competitor has, and then hit you with surprise charges for artwork, setup, and who knows what else. That's why I've been working with Brand Cowboy. They actually live in the ag, western, and outdoor world. No artwork fees, no setup fees, and they know what looks good because they're part of the culture. They're not faking it from an embroidery shop in the big city or screen printing shirts in their brother-in-law's garage. We're even building Wealthy Cowboy Show merch with them right now, and it's been awesome. They made it easy, fast, and actually fun. And if you want more than logos on blanks, they've got full cut and sew capabilities built from scratch, custom fabrics just for your brand. Private labeling inside and out. Head to brandcowboy.com and book a call. Mention Crockett and get a free 30-minute consultation on how you can build merchandise that your customers will actually want to wear, and at such a high quality you could offer it for sale no matter what industry you're in. Brand Cowboy, made for you, made for your brand.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm not changing the subject, but just so Too Tall doesn't kill me, the name of Andrea Fapani's podcast with Too Tall is Along for the Ride. So that's it.
I was thinking it was something like Ride.
And don't shoot me, Too Tall. But no, along with what you're saying, it's really an interesting medium, I guess, or media type, a platform, the podcast. And I have spent my entire career thinking about how to interview someone the right way. And there's an art to it, really. But as far as growth goes, personal growth goes, it was really good for me to get into podcasting because all of a sudden I realized there's another way of interviewing someone, in front of a microphone it's being recorded versus when you're just bouncing around in the truck and you're running your recorder and you're getting quotes for an article. It's a little different. And Too Tall's been really good at coaching me along, quit saying and quit, doing these hesitations in your delivery or whatever. So you got to think about that stuff. But it's you kind of getting someone to be willing to share their story, and open up and kind of peel back the curtain and talk about their life is it's not easy to do always. And I love the challenge of trying to get someone to feel comfortable enough to tell their story, because so many of these people that we talk to, they have great stories. And I think that's what's really unique about the ranching industry and the horse business is people aren't in this only to make money. They have a genuine passion. And there's almost always these great stories about how they had to go through this. There was this trial, there's this time that they went broke, and they just keep persevering, and a lot of heartache, a lot of life throws a lot of funny curves at people. And then if you're in this industry, they just keep figuring out a way to make it work. I think that's what makes these stories so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always asked that. I'm going to ask you later, but like one thing, and I've had perseverance on there. A lot was the answer to it a lot. Another one was like, you got to love it. Which would relate to perseverance, was like, if you're doing something and you don't love it, when things get hard, you're going to quit. But if you love it, you'll keep, keep pushing through.
Right.
And, that's something, I mean, in anything, whatever you choose to do, whether it's ranching or riding or some other business, it's going to get hard. There's nothing, I've jumped around into different things and that's one thing I realize is like, it doesn't matter what you do. It's going to be hard at some point. You always see the people that are at the top and you're like, oh, they make it look so easy, but they also at some point went through hardships.
Oh yeah.
Had to push through. And I want to talk about that. Like I have that, especially, I'm sure you do a lot. The people I have on that are like, not big social media people at all, or, public people, I guess, like a rancher or something. It's a skill. It's a whole skill to keep the conversation, lead the conversation. If I've had some people in here that I barely have to talk, I ask them one question and I go for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But to be able to draw it out of some people is a chore.
Sure.
And I know you do. I figured like in your, like when you're writing stories and stuff, you had a tape recorder and there's some type of interview process, but I guess it's not as dynamic as sitting here doing a show with
right.
no editing and all that.
Right.
How was that, like developing that?
Well, developing that skill and I think it's a lot of it's listening to your interview after the fact, and being really critical of yourself and thinking about how can I ask that question better, and how can I keep the conversation going so there's not some awkward pause like there was just a couple seconds ago. But no, I don't know. And I think there's probably a lot of learning things that I've picked up that I probably don't even realize just because I've been doing this for a long time. But no, I don't know. It's there's an art to it, and I think about how this might be a strange anecdote, but Barbara Walters years ago was really respected for how well she interviewed people on TV. And I remember looking into that and it's hearing about how she was spent. I mean, she'd have these interviews on 60 Minutes or whatever show she was doing, and people would just open up and they'd cry on her show, and then they'd be like, "Wow, how did she get that out of this? This celebrity's had done all these interviews, and how did she get that out of him?" But she would spend a day, maybe longer, I don't know, maybe sometimes less, but she would spend a lot of time hanging out with that person and talking to them. And I try to do that too. I mean, right now with my podcast, I have an advantage of a lot of these folks I've interviewed so far. I know pretty well, so they're already comfortable with me. But whenever you do interview someone that you don't know, you got to do your homework beforehand and know what they're about, know what they've accomplished, and try to start figuring out what makes them tick. But then, I try to spend a lot of time when we're not on the mic talking to them, and sometimes you just riding along with them in the pickup truck, you're going from here to there, and you get a lot of good stuff where they'll share it with you, and then you got to figure out, okay, well, I might take notes. I'm going to ask that question, but then you also got to know that I'm also try to be really respectful of their privacy too, and try not to wade into waters that really make them really super uncomfortable. I know other journalists that love to get you uncomfortable, but I've never been that way. I think you want people to tell the story that they're comfortable telling, but you got to draw some stuff out of them. So, I think research is a big thing, and rapport is a big thing. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I've tried it both ways. My first episode for sure. I mean, just to kind of get over the nerves, I guess. I envisioned it. I did lots of research. I mean, I knew exactly, everything that was going to go back and forth. Like I pretty much knew, I had it all mapped out in my head before it ever happened. And so that helped with the nerves. And then kind of, then after that one, I mean, I did as much research as possible, but then you get into some people that I can't just research on social media. But I did a lot of people I knew, but when I started getting further out of my network, and but luckily, I mean, I started doing it. It kind of went along with, I was comfortable with it, and then I felt like I could just talk to somebody on camera and do good. I have felt sometimes like I didn't do as good of a job. I was like, man, if I could have researched that some more, I could have drawn so much more out, because like we'll be in here talking before or after, not before or I would have known, but being here talking after, I'm like, dang, why didn't you say that on the show? That would have been good to share. So I missed out some stuff that way, but it's also real organic. I know everybody's like, what do I need to prepare for? What questions are you going to ask? I'm like, I don't know. Like I have rapid questions that are, that I write down, but other than that, it's just, we'll see how it goes.
There's times that I'll send them questions ahead of time so they can be thinking about it, be prepared. And there's times that I don't. There's times I kind of throw them a little bit of a surprise question, and just to set them off, not to be mean, or just to, sometimes you do a better job if you ask that question at a certain time. And the other thing I was going to say was that, when you're preparing for these interviews, I mean, it's, you gotta kind of know what they've accomplished. And maybe it's even good sometimes to talk to their friends, because I think in this industry we're in, so many cowboys are pretty humble. Trip Townsend's a good example. We were talking to him last week. He is not going to toot his own horn. And that we run into that a lot, I think, with these folks. They're not just going to talk about they're not going to brag about all the great things they did. So you kind of have to know that stuff, either to set up a question or at least to, talk about who these people are and why they're important. Because, a lot of cowboys, they're not going to just go on and on about how awesome they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I definitely see that. And then also sometimes I think like people want to tell their story and they'll just spew out more than you ever could imagine.
Sometimes they will.
Yeah. I mean, not bragging, but just all the stuff they've gone through and stuff, And
then that's another situation you get into doing these interviews, is when someone goes on and on, you're like, okay, now, and maybe you're thinking this a few seconds ago, this guy's going on, and this is so boring. How do I respectfully interrupt him and change course a little bit?
No, definitely not. What's some interesting ones that, like some big ones for you that you've done that on the, I guess either in your whole journalism career, either on the podcast or writing stories about some interesting stories that you've covered?
Well, I think the best story I ever wrote was in 2010. This is before I was podcasting. And it was called Wild Cow Catchers. And guys, I
remember that one. That's a good one.
You remember that story?
Your podcast.
Okay. What's cool is I did that story in 2010, and then here last year I interviewed Travis Erickson, who was the subject of that story. So we kind of reviewed that story together. But that, I don't know. I think if anything is as wild and cowboy to tell a story about, it's those wild cow catchers. And these guys were gathering, pretty much feral cows out there in the rugged, mountainous, rocky, dry country of Arizona. And a horseman that we knew, we'd done some stories on, the guy named Mike Keble, approached us and said, y'all need to do a story about these guys. And the funny thing is, he talked to one of the writers for Western Horseman, and she's like, I don't know if I am able to do that. Not that this is super high level stuff, but she just didn't think she was savvy enough horseback. And so she said, you ought to do this story. I was like, oh, okay. And so I got up there, and I don't know if I was ready to go out there and do this story, but they gave me a horse, and I think 30 minutes, and we told this story on the podcast last year, but 30 minutes into the ride, we're going uphill, and apparently I hadn't cinched down my saddle quite enough, and saddle starts sliding, and the horse ends up sliding, falling down, and I land in cactus, and that was, the funny thing is, I remember
they were probably thinking, this dude.
Travis told me, and he said this on the podcast. He said, as soon as that happened, I was like, well, all right, this day's over with. We're going to go back. And I was like, no, let's go. And so, we rode for half a day looking, tracking cows and not finding anything. And then finally we found a set of them, and they take off. I mean, going downhill. I mean, just full blast. And the adrenaline is just going crazy, and you can feel it in your horse, and you can feel it in yourself, of course. And one of my favorite photos I ever took was of Travis Erickson on that trip. Mm-hmm. And I'd followed a little bit slower downhill and got set up just in time. And he's roping this cow, and she's kicking his horse in the chest at the same time. And he's got his loop out, and got that photo. That was a fun couple days. And And Travis is a funny guy to talk to. And so it was last year I contacted him. I said, we should talk about that trip because it was a fun story to write. It was a fun story to photograph, and I survived. And so I had him on the podcast last year, and we talked about that story again. But it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stories like that. There's a lot of great people that have incredible stories. I think about Shannon Hall. I've known him for 20 years. And I've been to his place to tell stories, to write stories, to do photos, or just to go hang out when he's, doing branding or whatever. And I've been there when he's fed with his teams. And so he was my second episode ever. And we talked about this terrible storm that went through their place a few years ago, and it just froze up the tanks, and there was ice and snow, and heifers were having their first calves, and they were finding calves frozen to the ground, and they were chopping ice, and then they'd chop ice, or cows would walk out to the tank and fall through, and they were dragging them out of the water. It was just catastrophic, and Shannon tells that story, and you learn about the kind of perseverance that people have, but then the love that they have for what they do and for their family that's helping them, and those are all great stories to tell, So that stands out in my mind. Shannon Hall stands out in my mind. Doing stories on some big ranches out west. People always ask me, what ranches you been on? Well, to say that I've been able to ride and help out at the 4.6s or Tongue River or the CS Ranch in New Mexico. I was just on the Wine Cup Gamble Ranch in Nevada back in September. That was awesome. There's been ranches in California, and great people to get to meet. You learn, you hear about these legendary people or these legendary ranches, and then you meet the people behind it, and you're like, well, I understand why they're legendary, because these people they're sold out in this thing.
Yeah, I think it's so cool to share those stories, and give people a deeper look. Like I said, I think people are thirsty for that, of not only people in our industry that are ate up with ranching and cowboy stuff, like that's all they want to consume and think about, but also getting the story out to the mainstream people that don't know where their food comes from, and don't know the things behind it and all the hardships and how hard it is, especially like recently, Trump always just says outlandish stuff, and he's talking about the ranchers making a bunch of money and all that.
Yeah,
and,
that's funny.
and I'm like, no, it's not really the case.
Right.
It's so I mean, but I think the reason is, like, the reason people don't know is just because we don't tell it. It's not out there enough.
If you didn't hear Ben Hale's story on episode 69, you need to check it out. He's been earning trust in the cattle industry one handshake at a time since 1995 at Western Livestock. Western Livestock is proud to be family-owned and operated, now with 5 locations: Oklahoma City, Woodward, Comanche, and Waurika, Oklahoma, and also Knoxville, Iowa. They're proud to do business the Western way, with honesty, integrity, and a handshake that still means something. You can join them ringside or stream their sales from wherever you are. Western Livestock, where a handshake is their word, cattle are money, and timing is everything. If you're looking to buy or sell, contact Ben Hale at 940-631-BEEF. That's 940-631-2333. Check them out on Facebook or westernlivestock.com.
Tucker Brown says that pretty well a lot of times, is we just don't tell our story enough, But yeah, it's not an easy life. It's I mean, maybe right now some ranchers are doing pretty well because of the price of beef is so high, but it can just in a heartbeat all of a sudden hit a drought, or some market crash can hit us, and they feel the brunt of that.
Mm-hmm.
I did a podcast with a guy named John Welch, and he talks about that drought of 2011 and how devastating that was. And so many ranchers they were just getting rid of their herds, or they were shipping them north, and it was devastating. And that's the reality. And there's not a lot of, so many of these people, everything that they do is based on that what that Cowherd's doing, and maybe the horse program as well. But when catastrophes hit or markets crash or whatever, they're selling trucks or selling land or doing whatever they can to kind of keep things going.
Yeah, it's tough, and that's why I diversified into other businesses. Was like Mother Nature, and I mean you have no control because you have Mother Nature, which you can't control or predict, and then you have the markets, which you can't control or predict. You have some things you can control, but like the big driving forces of how your operation is doing in ranching or farming or any of that is very uncontrollable. Whereas in just a storefront on Main Street or a media business or something like that, I mean, you can kind of control a lot of it. You can predict your income and your expenses, pretty closely, short of a COVID or some kind of event like that, but it's way more predictable. And that's why, I mean, I'm sure you see a lot too, telling these stories, like a lot of ranchers talk about having a wife that works in town that has a predictable income, or like you said, you had that predictable income, the security.
Right.
But as a rancher in general this show, I think, merges it really well, because I see so much, especially doing a deeper dive and talking to both sides, the similarities in ranching and entrepreneurship. You got to be a risk taker, willing to bet it all.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes you hear a lot of big entrepreneurs, have gone broke before. A lot of ranchers that have been in a long time have gone broke before. So there's a lot of similarities. And then also how you run your business, or the successful ones on both sides, how they run their business, a lot of similarities and stuff. So it's cool to see that and compare it, but ranching, is just so tough. And I think like just getting that story out there, showing how much we care about the animal, about the land. I think like John Dutton, to reference Yellowstone. I know a lot of people don't like Yellowstone, but he said it in a speech he gave on there to like some association or whatever. He's like, this is the only place that we work hard all year to hopefully break even. Yeah. Breaking even is a good year.
Yeah. The other thing I think I've discovered covering this industry for a long time is, and especially talking from a business standpoint, is I think cowboys, they're not known to be millionaires, obviously, and, great economic tycoons or anything, but they are resourceful. And I think when you're in this lifestyle, you learn to be resourceful enough to where you like, if I'm gonna keep pursuing this passion, I got to figure out a way to shoe horses or train some horses on the side, or do a real estate deal, or market some cattle or whatever. And I think that's what's neat about this industry is, people, they learn to be an entrepreneur. You kind of have to learn to be more of an entrepreneur, because it's just you. There's not a guaranteed paycheck, even if you're working for a ranch. That might not be guaranteed for you. You never know what happens, or you might get in a terrible horse wreck, and then all of a sudden you're trying to figure out how to make a living, try to feed your family, when your skills as a cowboy are maybe gone temporarily when you don't have that. So I find that pretty interesting and pretty inspiring, how people in this business are resourceful. And also think that it's cool too that there's some very intelligent men and women in this industry, and if they were in a different industry, they'd probably be making a lot more money, but they keep staying here because they're doing what they love. Mm-hmm. And I think just about every cowboy, I think, and that's a blanket statement, I know, but I think just about every cowboy is willing to probably not do quite so well financially because they want to stay hooked to something they love. And there's a lot to be said for that,
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a balance of happiness.
Yeah.
Like this guy I follow, and he actually owns some
they call it farmland. But he's made a lot of money in mainstream business. But he talks about the pillars of the good life, and it's health, wealth, love, and happiness. And like and I see this a lot too, is like, and I think people mess up the picture of wealthy people, that a lot of them are miserable, which a lot of them are, but there's also the balance of balancing your love life, your happiness with your money and
Right.
all that stuff. I mean, you have people that are just maniacs like Elon, or something that's like just a different person, a different breed, or Trump even, that he doesn't sleep. He's somewhat of a maniac too. But like, there's also a lot of people that can balance that happiness with making money, or, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can have both.
My son is big time into cars and sports cars and so forth, and he loves Ferraris, Lamborghinis. He's a young guy, but he's really pretty smart on all that stuff already. And there was a documentary on Lamborghini that came out a few years ago, and we watched that a few weeks ago, he and I. And the story's about how Lamborghini he started out as just a tractor builder, and then he ended up building this incredible car. And his passion was always to have the best car in the world, And the documentary it's kind of sad, but at the same time, I think it was very well done, because you see how every step of his life he sacrifices something in his relationships in order to pursue building the best sports car in the world. And he loses a wife over it. He loses a good relationship with his parents over it. And he ends up getting to the pinnacle. And there he is alone in his mansion at the end of the documentary. And you're like, well, and I remember turning to my son saying, okay, so look at this. And he's 11 years old, so it's good to find teachable moments. But I was like, look at this. Look what he accomplished. But where is he? He's alone in this mansion. And I think all of us, like you said, there's a balance, and you got to figure out, what do I really want out of life? Do I want to just be the best at this, or is it more important that I have friends and family that care about me? Is it better that maybe it's better that you made an impact on somebody's life? Maybe you help mentor someone. I think we can all pursue excellence in whatever our calling is, but you got to be careful not to just be sacrificing the people around you or missing opportunities to make a difference.
Yeah. I mean, I think even Elon says, like, he's like, you don't want to be me, Yeah. Because he knows, like, I'm sure he's happy. He might say that he doesn't have any regrets. But you look at him, you look at Michael Jordan, one of the greatest of all time, but kind of same deal alone, like sacrificed everything else to get there.
Yeah.
So it's like it's finding that medium. If you want to be the top person in anything, I think it's going to take that, like, to be the greatest, to be a legend. You look at, like you said, like Lamborghini, you can see that across pretty much any industry or sport, or whatever you look at, to somebody that's going to stand out like head and shoulders above everybody else. They sacrifice basically everything else to get that. But what if you were just like a little bit below that, and you didn't ruin all your relationships, and you had a family or whatever.
Right.
So I always tell people like that. That's the most important thing you can do, is sit down and really figure out what success looks like to you, your dream life, your dream day, and then you just work towards that every day. And and if that's having a good relationship and spending a lot of time with your wife and kids, which is what I try to optimize for, but I also want to make money. So it's going to keep me, from making a whole bunch of money, or, maybe not, or maybe I do it slower, but it's also, my happiness. But if I sacrifice that, maybe I could get further faster in the money game, or, whatever I wanted to pursue. But, I'm not willing to sacrifice that, because that's what happiness is to me.
Yeah. I think I think every one of us has to look real closely at our lives and figure out what truly motivates us. Is it my ego? Is it my insecurities? Is it me just trying to prove somebody wrong? Is it because I have a chip on my shoulder, or are we motivated by what we feel like our calling is?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you realize, I think everyone needs to figure what their purpose is, and it's not. Some people figure that out sooner than others do. But if you figure out what you were really called to do, what your purpose here is on this planet, I think that helps keep you grounded, and it allows you to pursue excellence at what you're supposed to do. But then if you're driven by your ego, or if you're driven by some insecurity that you have, I think it's easy for things to spin out of control pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, insecurity. That's another one. Like you hear a lot of the top people of, like, I keep bringing him up. I don't know why he's just on my mind, but a lot of those top people, they have a insecurity back there in their past.
Absolutely.
That they're trying to prove somebody wrong, or right or wrong or whatever, and they just blow it out of proportion, and so they can look back, look at me now.
Yeah. I mean, I think Michael Jordan, you brought him up. I think I've read about him, and I don't know him obviously, but I think he was driven a lot by some insecurities, and still accomplished some great things. But yeah, it's easy for any of us to be insecure and maybe not even realize it, but be insecure about something. And there's a lot to be said for some deep introspection, being willing to be humble, and be willing to listen to what other people have to say, and let that temper where you're headed, and then keep thinking about, what are you supposed to really be doing? What's your calling? And it's, we can see this prize out there, whether it be fame or fortune or whatever, and be going after that and think we're doing the right thing. But a lot of times it's really more of, that's probably not, I'm getting out of my lane. I'm getting out of bounds of what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think about that a lot with my life. I try to not get too caught up in everything. And, I've got a family. I've got a wife and a son, and I've got friends around me, and I've got extended family. And, if you start kind of letting them go by the wayside, and don't pour yourself into that as much as you need to, I think you're kind of missing out, really.
Mm-hmm.
You end up alone in a mansion by yourself.
Yeah. And I heard kind of on like the ego humbleness thing, I heard a good one the other day on a Diary of a CEO. Kevin Hart was on there, a big time comedian, and he was talking about like being able to go like ask for help and realize that you don't know. Yeah. Especially, after, like, he was relating it back to investing money, and after he had made a bunch of money in his in his little circle of entertainment, and he said people were coming up to me like, you could do this with that or this. And he said his first thought, he's like, what? You're going to take my money and you're going to give me back this much? This is a scam. I know it's a scam. It's hilarious, but it's true. And like, so he said he approached it, and he's diversified into becoming an owner and like owning some businesses attached to his likeness, and like he uses his name and stuff. Like he's done really good business as a, not just on the comedy entertainment side, but he's built businesses around it. And he was talking about that. He's like, most people aren't willing to look stupid and be like, hey, I don't know anything about this. Can you teach me? And being willing to sit there and learn and look dumb. And we talked about that in our conversation the other day. Like, that's why people don't, after a certain age, I think it really happens at like puberty. After that, you don't want to look dumb, so you quit trying new things. Yeah. You're just like, I know a little bit about this sport or this activity, so that's all I'm going to do, and I'm just going to decline to go try anything new, the rest of my life. And as when you're young, you try all these different things, and of course, anything new you try, you look dumb. You're not going to be good at it. I mean, sometimes you're going to beginner's luck or whatever, but you're not going to be the best when you start something new. And then at some point you start caring about what people think, and then you're like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. And then you just get tied in that identity. I
shared a deal a while back, and it was like something in your 20s. It's like in your 20s, you don't care what people think. And then in your 30s, or in your 20s, you care what people think. And then in your 30s, you quit caring what they think. And then I can't remember, it goes on like in your 40s, you realize they didn't even think about you anyway. And I've seen, I'm not in my 40s yet, but I've seen the progression of somewhere around 30. It was like, I don't care what people think anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's like a whole weight lifted off your shoulders where you can go. It gives you the freedom to go try new things and stuff like that.
Running a ranch today means managing far more than cows. You're balancing multiple enterprises, family partners, land bases, leases, inventory, equipment, and markets that move fast. But if your books and inventories live in the checkbook, spreadsheets, or buried inside of QuickBooks, you're always reacting instead of steering the business. Ambrook gives ranchers real managerial insight, not just bookkeeping. See profitability by enterprise or location, know whether hay is paying for itself, whether stockers outperformed cow-calf this year, or whether that rented pasture is worth keeping. Your balance sheet updates automatically and with ag-specific inventory management. You always know exactly what feed, inputs, and livestock you have on hand and what they're costing you. Tag receipts from the feed store, reconcile from the tractor, and eliminate the year-end scramble. Ranchers save up to 90% of bookkeeping time and finally get numbers they can trust for family meetings, lenders, and major expansion decisions. Ambrook is built for ranching complexity, not just generic small business accounting. Try it free for a month at ambrook.com/wealthycowboy. That's AMBROOK.com/wealthycowboy.
Going back to humility, I remember years ago I did a story on the Spanish Ranch in Nevada, and I had the opportunity to write the article, but David Steckline was a photographer. He's a great photographer for so many years, and he was a fun guy. He was just really lots of energy, real funny, could tell stories as good as any of those cowboys. But and I hadn't been around him a whole lot, but we're there. And at the time, I was probably in my 30s, probably 32 or so. And he made the comment to me, and it I kind of already knew it, but the fact that he said it really drew it home. He said, "Ross," he says, "you do good because you're not afraid to ask a stupid question." And that really stuck with me at that point. And even I think I maybe even leaned into that even more. Like, you know what? You've got to ask a stupid question. And of course, in my line of work, your line of work too, that's part of it, is asking questions. I mean, everything I do is based on asking a question. So maybe it's easier for me to grasp that concept a little more. But yeah, I think that's been a strength of mine, and something that's benefited me quite a bit is I'm all about asking questions. Mm-hmm. And it takes a little humility to do that. There's not everyone is gracious and gently answers your question. I've had plenty of guys that look at me like I'm an absolute moron. How do you ask that question? But you just move on and keep asking questions, and there's no way to learn. You can either learn how to get smarter, you can learn how dumb you were to begin with, but either way, you're learning, and I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, and it's I think like if you don't do it enough, then you don't see the reward. I think it's kind of a numbers game, like sales or anything. Like, yeah, you might if you ask a question that's maybe considered dumb or like just very beginner level, and you're around the wrong person and you get made fun of or something for it, then the next time you're in that situation, you're probably not going to ask. But if you got rewarded that first time, you'll probably keep going down that path. And because that's what I've done in my life now is forever I was scared, and then once I let go of that, and then I started getting rewarded for asking questions and for getting uncomfortable, putting myself in uncomfortable positions, getting out of your comfort zone, trying new things like this. So now it's like I'm addicted to that. I'm like, on the other side of my comfort zone is going to be some type of reward, or on the other side of asking for a sale or to come on, the other side of asking a question is going to be a reward. it doesn't happen every time, but really probably more times than not. I mean, the reward is out there. And so that has me striving for the opposite. Like I'm like, how can I push out further? Because there's going to be another reward out there. How can I ask more questions to more people? Because there's going to be more rewards out there. But like if you only do it a couple of times and you get shot down, then it's like, oh, this doesn't work. I'm not going to ask questions anymore. I'm not going to get outside my comfort zone.
I think, and that's I think all of us battle that as humans. We always look for that comfort zone. We in fact, I mean, I take my spiritual life pretty seriously too, and I remember praying to God one day, and when we were talking about the situation I was in at that time. And I remember he was very specific to me. He told me, he's like, when are you going to learn that you're not just looking, like I was in a tough spot at that time. I was just hopefully this phase of my life will pass and I'll be back to, and he said, when are you going to learn that you're not designed to live in your comfort zone? It's all about getting out of your comfort zone, and there's no way to grow, and there's no way to make a better influence than when you get out of that comfort zone. And I think all of us we're just kind of thinking, well, when I'm finally making this much money, now I could be comfortable. When I finally know all these people or have this amount of fame, then I'll be comfortable. And there's that every childhood story we read, the ending is they live happily ever after. That doesn't happen. We don't live happily ever after. Unless you find that comfort zone and you're just dumb and stupid and you're not progressing. But I mean, you can't, and I have to train myself over and over again. I can't think, okay, the goal is not for me to reach another comfort zone. My goal is to grow and to find my calling and progress and make myself a better person and try to make an impact on people around me. And there's no comfort zones and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. It just keeps moving. Just stay on the journey, stay progressing.
Yep.
Kind of on that note, what do you like? Where do you see your whole business going? Any new avenues or growth or anything like that, or what do you see coming up?
Yeah, this podcast has been a slow grower, and I'm fine with that. And by that I mean as far as being an actual business that pays for itself. We're making traction now. Early on, some of those very early episodes, there was no revenue. It was just a wash. I mean, it wasn't even a wash. It was just it was money out of my pocket to get it out there. Fortunately, there's the writing magazine articles is what helps me out quite a bit from a business standpoint, and then the photography. What I want to do is get Cowboy Life to continue to grow both from a listener standpoint, but then also from a sponsor standpoint. I want the photography. I've done a good amount for articles, and I've sold prints. I set up a booth in Amarillo, and I would love to get to the point where my photography business takes off. I'm not necessarily looking to do wedding photography or senior portraits or anything like that, but I kind of would love for fine art photography to be a big segment of my or a bigger segment of my business plan. And there's a lot to be said about that from the standpoint of, I think photography right now, cowboy photography probably isn't quite as in high demand as it was when David Steckline was doing photos or when Jay Dussard or Bank Langmore or Kurt Marcus were doing photography. I think there's a lot to be said for putting out an authentic product. If people know that what you shot is what really happened and wasn't AI generated or over photoshopped, I think it's important for that. So that's another podcast, I think. But no, I'd love to see that grow, and we're working on that. I put out another calendar this year, so, and I have I've had the great fortune that the National Ranching Heritage Center, they put on a show in June every year called the Summer Stampede, and it's photography, art, gear, and they invited me to be a part of that this year for the first time this past summer, and did well there. So that's what I want to do. And then I've got about 4 or 5 books in my mind that I would like to write. And some of them are fiction, some of them are biographical. And I haven't dove into that yet. I've kind of started them a little bit, but it's honestly, to be very honest, it is hard to invest that much time into a book and not know the financial benefit of that, especially when you're real busy. You're thinking, how do I just set aside that much time? And I need to do it. I'm saying this probably to kick myself in the butt because I need to get going on that, because I've always had this dream to write a book and I've never actually written a book. And that's something I'd love to do one of these days too. So maybe I'll get started on that pretty soon.
Yeah. The trick question I brought up earlier that I always ask is one skill, one trait to develop. You're telling somebody else, like, to be successful in life, you need this one thing. What would that be?
Can I give you 2?
I guess. Breaking the rules.
Well, okay, I'll give you one. And this, I don't know if this is a tool, but I mean, I think it's so important to understand your calling. Really, you need to know what you were meant to be. I think every one of us was put on this earth with a specific calling, and if you can figure out that, whether it's when you're a teenager or whether sometimes people don't figure it out until they're maybe in their 30s or the 40s, maybe even later than that, I don't know. But understanding your calling drives you so much. And then all of a sudden your motivation is not based on your own insecurities or your own ego or anything like that. It's based on you knowing, what the Lord has designed you to be and pursuing that. And then when you know what your calling is, I think it puts everything in the right perspective, and it helps you. Probably, knowing what your calling is, it's not just about who you are, it's about what you're supposed to do. And I think so many of us get wrapped up in in ourselves, and we get selfish. But if you know what your calling is, you know what you're supposed to be doing, not who you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And I think knowing that can help you out. It's a big tool, I think.
Yeah. I think in my life, like, starting this, like, before I started this, and I was day working and working at sale barns and riding horses and that whole hustle. And I just always had, like, an anxiety, it's like, I need to be, I'm not making, I'm not doing enough. Like it was just like, had no peace, And then, once I kind of got into this and sales and, like, doing all that, I felt, a lot more at peace. So I don't know if that was, like, I could describe that as kind of coming into my purpose or calling or something like that. But, like, it feels like you're just, like, at unrest if you're not doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you do a good job at this. I've been listening to your podcast, and I think I appreciate someone that can sit back and this is weird for me to be doing this much talking, actually, because I'm more comfortable asking a question and just letting them roll. But you do a good job of that. You sit there and you'll ask a good question, and you can let someone just tell their story. And I think that's important to do. Mm-hmm. Put yourself to the side a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what it's all about. I think in life in general is, that was probably one reason, was like, when you're hustling and, like, barely getting by, like, you're just thinking, how can I get by? How can I? And it's always me. And then if you can try to make an impact on the world, or, just on other people and help other people, then it brings me peace, but it also, compensates me, with peace and financial gain. Like, if you're helping other people, that's what a business is. You're bringing value to somebody else, and it takes it all off of you and puts it on them. And it's kind of like this, or public speaking or something. I've heard public speakers talk about that. It's like if you take it all off of you and you put it out there, and then it's not all on you, you kind of lose some of that fear, that anxiety.
Yeah.
I think that really helps.
For sure. Yeah.
Kind of on that, I mean, just advice in general that you'd give somebody getting started or wanting to make a change in their life.
Real quick, if you're a listener of this show and you're serious about leveling up your income, your mindset, and your life in 2026, you need to join the Wealthy Cowboy VIP community. It's where the real action happens. You'll get exclusive discounts from our sponsors, VIP merch deals, early access to episodes, private Q&As, and I even pull questions from the group to ask our guest on the show. It's a crew of driven Western people pushing each other to grow. The link is in the description. Go join now and see what's happening inside.
Well, I would say that, really think about, how to put this, really, I think be willing to learn and we be willing to be humbled, I think about, and I have a lot of people in the Bible that I really admire, and you read so many stories about whether it's Abraham or Moses or David or whatever. They all had these moments in life when they were humbled and where they probably weren't, killing giants, whatever. There's a time before that where they're being prepared. There's those times when you're, maybe not known, or maybe you're not as successful as you think you are, but you need to realize that maybe you're being prepared for something bigger. And so be willing to handle that time that you're humbled and learn from it. Learn to, put in the hard work, and sometimes things don't materialize, in a matter of months or a matter of years. Sometimes it takes longer than that. So, be patient and just keep plugging away. And I think if you keep your mind on what you're called to do, keep searching for that, keep pursuing what you're passionate about. Don't get, blindsided by, trying to pursue just money or the perfect career or the perfect relationships or whatever. Just know what your calling is and go after that, and, trust in the Lord, and he'll keep your mind straight. So that'd be my advice.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. And then always the hardest question is, what's your favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant is probably Perini's in Buffalo Gap, Texas. Great steak. And it's been a while since I've been there, actually, but that restaurant is, they do a really good job of making a steak, and you can't beat a steak and potato. And so I like, that's a good place. Yeah.
Yeah. Really good food and cool atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell everybody where they can find you, see all your work, get your calendar, your all your prints, everything like that. My Cowboy Life, you can find. We're on Apple Podcasts, we're on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher. Pretty easy to find. Cowboy Life. We have a Facebook page, a Cowboy Life Facebook page, and Instagram page. You can find out more about the stories I've done. Excuse me. On my website, which is rosshecox.com. And that reminds me, I need to probably update that thing. It's been a little while since I put some stuff up on that. And then, I write stories for Western Horseman pretty regular now, and as a freelancer. And I write stories for the Ranch Record, which is a quarterly publication put out by the Ranch and Heritage Center in Lubbock. I've done some stories for Quarter Horse News recently, their print product that they put out in the spring. I've done a few things for Quarter Horse Journal in the past. So all those titles are good places to find my work. And then comes to the Summer Stampede in June and up in Lubbock, and I'll probably have some stuff there, hopefully, if they let me come back in. Yeah. And your prints and all that, can you buy that online anywhere?
Yeah, if they will go to rosshecox.com, they can look at prints I have for sale, and I can make any size. I do stuff on metal, prints on metal that's pretty dang cool, and build the frames for that, and then or there's regular frame prints we do too as well. So yeah, that's at rosshecox.com.
Cool. Well, y'all go check out Cowboy Life. I think you'll really like that. If you're listening to this, you're probably a podcast listener, so y'all go check that out. There's really cool stories. He's got some really cool pictures and stuff that he does too. Go follow him. Go check it out. We'll see y'all next time.
As a business owner, Google reviews can make or break you. The problem, happy customers don't always speak up, and the few bad ones can drag you down fast. That's why we built Review Wizard, a free tool that makes getting 5-star reviews simple. Just post a QR code in your business. Customers can scan it, and in seconds, they leave you a review. But that's just the start. Review Wizard helps you respond to customers automatically, share reviews straight to social media, and even add them to your website to build instant trust. Every new review boosts your Google SEO ranking, making it easier for new customers to find you online. And if you want to take it to the next level, our AI upgrade can filter out the bad reviews before they hit your page and engage with your customers so you don't lose them. That means more good reviews, less damage control, and stronger relationships. The best part, the base version is completely free. No catch. Just click the link below and start turning your happy customers into your best marketing team today.